All right, hello everybody. The purpose of this video is to go over the EOC end of course Tennessee Ready Social Studies test, the US history test for 11th graders. Now, the questions of this style are pretty difficult, so I want to practice them all year long. Before doing this, you need to have already watched my lecture about the Transcontinental Railroad and Homestead Act. And then also the Dawes Act and the way it's federal policies toward Native Americans and the Plessy versus Ferguson Jim Crow laws one. I will put that all together with this video. I'll link them both so that way you can see it. We need to go over these because you need to be really familiar with this style of question. This is how our tests are going to be in this class, and so you need to be really good at these, especially by the end of the year. And you will be, because we're going to do this a lot. These questions are difficult and they do seem really tricky, but I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on how to figure it out, and it's actually really not that bad. You just have to pay attention to details. You got to be kind of like a little history detective or something in order to do it. Okay, so these questions are all related to First Standard, the Transcontinental Railroad, and the Homestead Act. All right, so let me zoom up here, scoot up, and that way we'll see. Cool. So what we're looking at here, the map is called, and you always need to look at the title of whatever it is, because the title can sometimes give away a lot of information. Years of statehood for selected states. Okay, so we're looking at these states right here, because they have the years on them, all right, so you look at your source briefly, you look at the title, always look at the title, and first thing we definitely need to do is read our question. Which factor facilitated statehood for the darker shaded areas? So we know years of statehood for these states. These are the states. Which one of these things, why did these become states is what it's asking. Which factor made these become states? Okay, so let's think about states. States need population. You gotta have people before you can have states, okay? They're not just gonna pick an area and be like, let's make this square right here, we're gonna call it a state, even though nobody lives there. No, you have to have a certain number of people living in an area for it to become a state, okay? So population. How did people get to this area? Well, what area is this? This is the West, okay? So how did people get here? Well, long time ago, there was the Oregon Trail, right? So people got there that way. Then we got the Transcontinental Railroad, hint, hint, that's your key. And so people are gonna be moving west at a faster rate. You got larger population moving to these areas. Why did these things become a state? So let's look at it. Which factor facilitated statehood? The introduction of barbed wire throughout the Great Plains. That doesn't have much to do with population. That was important, but it doesn't have much to do with population. Let's look at this one. The expansion of railway lines throughout the West. Possible. Remember, people are moving quicker and people are moving more often. Let's keep going, let's just see. The acceptance of Mormons by other religious sects in the East. Does that really have a whole lot to do with the statehoods? Maybe, not really, I don't know. And last one, the peaceful integration of settlers with American Indian population. Okay, if you know anything about American history, you know that settlers and American Indians typically did not get along. So the thing I like to do is do process of elimination, especially if I'm not sure. So like I said, barbed wire, that doesn't really have much to do with states. You can eliminate that one. The other answer we can quickly eliminate is the peaceful integration of settlers, because we know that settlers and American Indians were not peaceful together. Let's eliminate that one. That leaves us with two. The expansion of railway lines throughout the West and the acceptance of Mormons by other religious sects in the East. Mormons, if you know anything about American history, they're kind of a smaller group of religions in America. So I think our best answer and the correct answer is definitely going to be B, because we know that the Transcontinental Railroad, which started somewhere around this area and went west, so you're going to have people traveling along the Transcontinental Railroad and going north, going south. So they're going to go all these different places based off of the Transcontinental Railroad, which the route was about like that. Okay? I know it's messy, but B is going to be your answer. All right? Cool. Rock and roll. See, these questions are tough, but if you just kind of turn on your brain just a little bit and think about it, they're really, really not too bad. All right, let's go. So let's do this one. Number 2, railroads hired Chinese immigrants to build track on the Transcontinental Railroad. So still Transcontinental Railroad, okay? I always go, first of all, obviously, first step, read the title. Second step, read the question. Based on the excerpt, meaning this, which statement explains the condition in which Chinese immigrants worked? Now, if you remember from my lecture, I talked about Chinese immigrants who were working, they did the hardest jobs, and they were usually the lowest paid. So think about that, keep that in your mind as we go. You can read this if you'd like to, but what I like to do is read my answers first and see if they fit in. So based on the expert, which statement explains the condition in which they worked? A, they were invited to join railroad labor unions. Labor unions fight for rights of workers. Maybe. B, they were recruited to train new railroad workers. Well, look what it says. Railroads hired Chinese immigrants to build track. Maybe. We'll have to look. C, they worked for low wages to qualify for citizenship. That's possible because I told you they did work for low wages, so that one's possible. Or D, they worked in harsh conditions because of prejudice. We don't know the answer right off just based on the answer, so we gotta look, okay? All right, so the rich valued them as employees because they were willing to work for low wages. Okay, we see low wages. All right, there's low wages, it's possible. The working class, however, feared that they would take their jobs, thus making discrimination. There's a similar word down here, prejudice. So we got low wages and prejudice, discrimination there. Okay. Look, here's your key. This is going to give you the answer right here. Chinese immigrants could not become citizens. Okay. Chinese immigrants could not become citizens. So what does that automatically eliminate? This one, even though it has the low wages, could not become citizens. That automatically eliminates that one. So you can honestly, if you know the word prejudice and you know the word discrimination are more or less the same thing, you automatically know right there, boom, your best answer is going to be D. Okay? So, and it's the truth. They worked in harsh conditions because of prejudice. They were doing the hardest jobs because these white workers were not willing to do those jobs, okay? And they were willing to do it for very low wages. And low wages would fall under the category of harsh conditions. So D is going to be your answer on that one. Cool. See, these questions, they take a little bit of thinking, but if you just use your little clues here, think like a detective, you got it. All right? And again, on that one, prejudice, they were not treated as equals. So there are a lot of little clues in this one. All right, rock and roll, let's keep going. I like to read the smallest amount and try to figure out the answer. All right. Number 3, which number represents an area that was slow to be settled before the 1900s due to harsh climate? Okay, on this one you gotta have a little bit of historical knowledge. Basically, the Mississippi River runs about like that, okay? And before the 1900s, this area was well settled. There were a lot of people in this area before the 1900s, okay? And that even includes Louisiana because of the Louisiana Purchase, which was very early 1800s, okay? So we know that these two areas right off the bat are not going to be your answer because they were fast to be settled. Immigrants came across the Atlantic this way and they settled in these areas, okay? So, slow to be settled before the 1900s. That's going to be our clue here, before the 1900s. And you can use this harsh climate, but let's just use this clue first, before the 1900s. Number 1, there is a state that is about like that, and that number 1 is in that state. Something really big happened in 1849, before the 1900s, which drew a lot of settlers, so it was not slow to be settled. That was the gold rush, 1849 California gold rush. A lot of people came to California. And the climate there is really pretty good, honestly. So, just by process of elimination, we know that our answer is going to be 2. And also, if you look back at number 1, the ones about statehood, we know that that was late 1800s, early 1900s. It's going to be 2. Okay? All right. Hopefully this is all making sense. I think it is. If you got to turn your brain on just a little bit and think like a historian and think like a detective. All right. Okay, so let's answer. Here we go. All right, no source here, just straight up question to see if you know this. Which of the following was the main reason for the rapid settlement of the Great Plains during the late 1800s? So this is one you're going to have to remember, the Great Plains. The Great Plains, you need to remember, Transcontinental Railroad, because the Transcontinental Railroad cut right across the Great Plains, okay? Transcontinental Railroad cut right across the Great Plains. I'm repeating myself because it's super important. And when that railroad comes through, what does it bring with it? People, population, okay? So let's see if we can take a look. Congress passed the law, so which of the following was the main reason for settlement? F, Congress passed the law requiring all public lands to be sold at auction. We don't really know. No, not really, I don't know. G, Congress passed a law allowing people to claim public land and convert to private property through homesteading. I've heard this word before, homesteading. Remember the Homestead Act? Let's come back, let's just make sure. H, speculators bought large parcels of land and then built factory towns to attract new immigrants. We haven't discussed factory towns just yet, okay? So maybe, I don't know. Or J, Native Americans sold most of their tribal lands directly to railroad companies. If you know about history, you know, first of all, Native Americans didn't believe that they owned the land, they just believed that they lived on the land. And secondly, they were basically kicked off their land and the land was taken away from them. Homesteading, if you recall the Homestead Act, it was free land that was given to the settlers to farm and to develop. So our best answer is going to be this one, G. Okay? And it's the right answer. Cool? Cool. Move it. Number 5. How did the expansion of railroad transportation most benefit farmers in the United States? Okay. So, expansion of railroad transportation. Remember, the railroad is going to move things quickly. That's a key. The trains are going to move things quickly. All right, so let's take a look. A, by raising the consumer price of agricultural products? Maybe. B, by increasing the variety of locally grown crops? Maybe. C, by providing farmers with affordable access to distant markets? There's a key there. Railroad, distant. Things are moving quickly, things can go further, faster. Think about that. Or D, by encouraging farmers to form the first agricultural cooperatives. We didn't talk anything about that, okay? So A and B are decent answers, but C is going to be your best answer because things are moving quicker. You've got expansion, you've got distant, okay? So things are growing and things are getting further away, but the railroad moves things faster and it's going to benefit farmers to have access to more distant markets because they're selling their stuff further away. The more you sell, the more money you make. You got access to more markets, you're going to be making more money. Okay, cool. Number 6, which of the following contributed most to increased settlement of the Great Plains? Okay, so again, Great Plains, we got 2 things we got to think about. We got Homestead Act, that free land, okay? That's a grant of land. Free land is like a grant. That's a word you need to know. Hint, hint. Okay? And you've also got Transcontinental Railroad. There's nothing about the railroad on this one, so let's take a look. Which of the following contributed most to increased settlement, more people in the Great Plains? A, the availability of buffalo. Maybe. B, the discovery of precious metals. We didn't talk anything about precious metals in the Great Plains. C, a series of federal land grants, federal government land grants. That means they're giving land away. Or D, a decrease in agricultural production. We know that one's not right because they're going to be going out there to farm. Buffalo, we didn't talk much about. Buffalo hunting did become big, but much later. Discovery of precious metals, we definitely didn't talk about. So C is going to be your best answer. Okay. Hopefully this is all making sense. Basically, I'm just showing you how you're going to have to dissect each one of these questions. That's why these questions are hard, because you're really going to have to turn your brain on. It's not just going to be like, who was Abraham Lincoln? No, it's going to be like, you got to think at the next level. You got to take your thinking up a notch. But hopefully I'll help you get there through teaching you these skills and this knowledge, and hopefully through learning these little tricks that you've got to look at words. Increased settlement, giving away a series of land. Okay. But we'll get there. I know this is just the first one. We're going to get there. All right, let's go to the next one. So this is page 2. Let me go over here and zoom in real quick so that way we can see it perfectly. Dun, 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 dun. Hope everybody's having a good day, those of you at home. All right, here we go. All right, so it says, and remember, step 1, Always, always, always look at your title. The photographs are of the same student at Carlisle Indian School during the late 19th century. By the way, those of you at home, this is the page that says this at the top. US.02 Dawes Act and US.03 Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, compromise 1877. So again, these photographs are of the same student at Carlisle Indian School during the late 19th century. So think about Native Americans, what we've learned here, okay? So this is him as he entered the school in 1882. This is him 3 years later, same person. That's super crazy, but it is what it is, okay? So let me zoom in so that way we can see the answers. I think that'll work. Which word best explains the changes shown in these photographs? So you're gonna have to go back and think about the words that you know and the words that you learned about Native Americans and the way they were treated. All right, so let's take a look. Which word best explains the changes shown in these photographs? Immigration. Immigration means people moving from one place to another, coming into a place. That's not our answer, okay? Assimilation. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that that is our answer because it's vocabulary. That's the word you just got to know. They have made him assimilate into Western culture. They have made him go from his Native American ways to more Western ways. And remember back in those days, and I'm not being offensive, they were trying to make them more like white people, okay? Nullification means taking away something, and nativism, this is not nativism. Nativism might be something you might think. Nativism is having extreme pride in the place where you're from, okay? But you just got to know that one, assimilation. So again, these questions are kind of a mix of like, can you be a detective, but also can you remember what you learned? So this test is hard, but you're going to be all right. You can do it. All right, again, so one you're just going to have to kind of know because it doesn't really give you a clue or anything, but you just got to kind of know it. But you'll know it. It's okay. We're going to go over this one a lot. Number 2, the primary objective of the Dawes Act. The Dawes Act, remember, broke up tribal lands. That's a big one. So let's see. It also turned Indian culture, Native American culture kind of differently. It changed culture, so let's see. And if you can use this one, you'll know the answer. The primary objective of the Dawes Act was to A, promote cultural assimilation of American Indians. That's a very good guess. B, turn American Indian reservations into corporate farmland. Remember, reservations were made and kept separate from everything else, okay? So they kind of left those alone. So that one's not going to be our answer, B. And I apologize if this video is a little bit boring, but guys, you have to learn this stuff. The primary objective of the Dawes Act was to end warfare between American Indians and the U.S. military. That's a good guess, but Dawes Act is not a treaty. So, no. D, promote American Indian investment in private industry. If you learned anything, you learned that American Indians did not have a lot of money, okay? And that most of them had no money. So it's not going to be that one either. Promote cultural assimilation. Remember, this broke up land. So this broke up land. And the reason why they broke up land is they said, hey, tribes cannot own land. You as an individual can own land because that's what we as white people do in America back in those days. And we're not being offensive. That's just how the culture was. That was the mindset of we as Westerners, we as white people, you do not look like us, but we want you to act like us, so you have to own the land. You can't just live on the land. And it was basically a way for white people to come in and buy this land out from under them. They broke up their lands, said, hey, you can't have tribal lands, you've got to have individual land. And so this is cultural assimilation. It's trying to change their culture, but really it was a trick just to get that right there, land. Okay, moving on. Email me if you got any questions. I know this stuff is tough, but as we do it more and more often, we're going to do it all year long. As we do it more and more often, it'll get easier. Right? Okay. In 1870, so there's no title here, but let's take a look at this. What was one method that states used to bypass this constitutional amendment? So here's what it says. You're going to have to just read this one. In 1870, the 15th Amendment was ratified, which provided specifically that the right to vote shall not be denied on the basis of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Okay, this superseded state laws that had directly prohibited black voting. So 1870 basically gave former slaves the right to vote. It gave African Americans the right to vote. The 15th Amendment is right to vote for African Americans. Basically everybody, but it was targeted towards African Americans, okay? So what was one method that states used to bypass this constitutional amendment? So you need to know, bypass, how did states, southern states, get around this amendment? How did southern states keep African Americans from voting is what this question is asking. Now it's really tricky, but you gotta start thinking like this at this next level. What is a way that states tried to keep African Americans from voting? So let's take a look. Voters had to live in an urban area before being allowed to vote. We didn't talk anything about that, no. Prospective voters, meaning people who wanted to vote, were required to pass a literacy test. We definitely talked about literacy tests in order to vote. Let's check our other answers before we choose that one. C, voters were required to join the armed forces in order to vote. We never talked anything about that one. Or D, prospective voters had to become citizens before being allowed to vote. If you know, the 14th Amendment gave citizenship to African Americans. I think it's 14th Amendment, I'm pretty sure. I'm a little weird on my amendments, there's so many of them. And so it's definitely gonna be B, okay? So it's B. Prospective voters were required to pass a literacy test. Remember, it was a way to try to get African Americans to stop voting or not be able to vote. Okay? Okay. Moving on. We're going quick, but I'm trying not to bore you to death. I know this stuff is weird. All right, this might be hard to see. You can see it on your paper though. Hopefully you've got it in front of you. So here we go. Number 4, Supreme Court decisions were instrumental in achieving the goals of the civil rights movement. Okay? So before we look at it, let's read the question. According to the information above, which issues were in conflict in these Supreme Court decisions? Okay, so we got 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, upheld the separate but equal law. Remember, that was the one about the trains, Plessy versus Ferguson. They said you can have train cars for white people and you have train cars for black people and the other facilities too, okay? And then 1917, Buchanan v. Worley overturned a law requiring segregated residential areas. Don't have to know that one that much, but let's take a look at this one, okay? All right, which issues were in conflict in these Supreme Court's decisions? Is it gonna be A, states' rights and the 10th Amendment? Nah, we haven't really talked much about that. There is one that we talked about. B, judicial review and the 5th Amendment. Didn't talk anything about judicial review for sure. C, individual rights and the 13th Amendment. That's a very good possibility. Or D, legalized discrimination and the 14th Amendment. Okay, so it's going to be between C and D. Now, if we see Plessy versus Ferguson upheld a law allowing separate but equal, that is legalized discrimination. So it's definitely going to be this one, D. 4 is D. Okay? All right, let's keep going. I know it's kind of boring, but it is what it is. You gotta learn this stuff. All right. In 1896, the Supreme Court upheld this Louisiana law. We're going back to Plessy versus Ferguson here. What was a consequence of this ruling? Okay, I'm just gonna read it to you. It says, all railway companies carrying passengers and their coaches in this state shall provide equal but separate accommodations. No person or persons shall be admitted to occupy seats in coaches other than ones assigned to them on account of the race that they belong to. So this is the black and white train cars thing, okay? So what was the consequence of this ruling? A, exceptions were made based on economic status, meaning if you have money, you could get accepted, and I don't know. B, facilities provided for African Americans were inferior. That's a very good guess. Let's come back to that one. C, public funds were withheld from companies for refusing to comply. This is the law, so it's not going to be public funds were withheld. They're gonna keep giving them money. D, local governments passed laws protecting African American equality. Separate but equal was never equal. Okay, it was separate, but it was never equal. Remember, I always told you the facilities for African Americans were always inferior. Okay, remember the picture of the water fountain? White people have this really nice water fountain. African Americans get the really crappy water fountain. So it's going to be B. Okay, so 5 is B on that one. Cool? Cool. All right, last one. Two more. In the late 1800s, the Supreme Court's decision in Plessy v. Ferguson. Let's see here. So again, going back to Plessy v. Ferguson, separate but equal. F, established a legal remedy for victims of discrimination. No, it's not a remedy. A remedy is a cure, okay? And they didn't care about victims of discrimination. G, created a legal justification, meaning they had a reason to legally create segregation laws. Segregation is separate. Hint, hint. H, affirmed the legality of federal regulation of state elections. Plessy v. Ferguson does not have to do with state elections. J, recognized public protest as a legal form of civil disobedience. That had nothing to do with a protest. So for this one, Plessy v. Ferguson, you've got to always remember segregation. Separate but equal. Okay? So 6 is G. Last one. Number 7, which statement best explains how the Electoral College controversy during the Hayes-Tilden presidential election of 1876 was resolved? The clue here, you've just got to remember Hayes. Hayes did something really bad to become president. Hayes said, I'll end Reconstruction in the South, I'll pull the troops out of the South if I get your electoral votes in the presidential election, your electoral votes. Hayes got the votes of the southern states because he made a deal. He said, I'll pull the troops out of the South, okay? So, and pulling the troops out of the South means a formal end to Reconstruction because that was the physical evidence of Reconstruction. Troops stationed in the South to keep an eye on things, to make sure things were going okay. Hayes says, look, I know y'all hate those down there. I want to be president really bad. Let me be president. I'll pull the troops out. So I'm not even going to read all of them to you because letter A is going to be your answer. Hayes promised to end Reconstruction if he received the electoral support of the southern states. Okay, so again, I know that these questions are weird. I know that they're hard, but guys, you got to practice these. You got to know these. So hopefully at home you're looking at this stuff and you're getting familiar with it because our first test and all of our tests are going to be very, very similar to this. And honestly, some of these exact questions are going to be on our tests in this class, okay? So get ready to start thinking like this. We take our history basic knowledge and we put it on another level. We're using sources, we're using maps, we're using cartoons, things like that to answer questions about the knowledge that we already have, okay? Please email me with any questions. This is just for you to have at home and just for you to keep in your folder so that way you can practice. Keep it on your computer somewhere so that way you can go back to it and review, and hopefully you feel a little more confident when dealing with these questions. Please email me with any questions and have a great day. See ya.